They were children molded for war, indoctrinated to worship Hitler as a god, and taught that mercy was weakness. By 1945, millions of boys and girls wore the uniform of the Hitler Youth, many of them armed, many of them ready to die. But when the Third Reich collapsed, these children weren't simply freed. They were left with guilt, trauma, and a world that suddenly declared them criminals. So, what happened to the Hitler Youth after the war ended? And how did a generation raised to fight for Nazism learn to live with what they had been? In the final, desperate months of World War II, the Hitler Youth were no longer just marching, singing, or handing out pamphlets. They had become soldiers. Children, some as young as 12, were handed Panzerfausts and told that dying for the Führer was glorious. Many did. Those who survived watched everything they had been taught collapse with the Reich itself. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, there was no master plan for dealing with millions of militarized and indoctrinated young people. The Allies saw them not just as victims, but as potential threats. Former propaganda had drilled into these boys and girls that Allied forces were monsters who would torture and kill them. As Allied troops advanced, many Hitler Youth members resisted fiercely, even after grown soldiers had surrendered. They ambushed patrols. They refused orders from German officers who told them the war was over. Some continued to fight until they were physically stopped or captured. When the guns finally fell silent, many of these youths tried to melt back into civilian life. They threw away their armbands, buried their uniforms, and pretended they had never believed. But the Allies were not fooled. They knew Nazism had not been defeated in the mind, and the Hitler Youth were the most deeply conditioned of all. In the American, British, and French occupation zones, the response was to dismantle the organization entirely. Leaders were arrested, training grounds were shut down, statues and insignia were destroyed, but this was just the beginning. What followed was a far more complex and painful process: denazification. For adults, the task was legal: trials, interrogations, official documents. For children, it was psychological. Teachers replaced lessons of racial superiority with lessons on democracy. New youth organizations like the Scouts or church groups tried to reclaim their identities. Millions of Hitler Youth were required to attend reeducation sessions, where films of concentration camps were shown to force them to confront what they had supported. Some were horrified, some refused to believe, and some broke down, unable to reconcile what they had witnessed with the lies they had been fed. But in the Soviet-occupied East Germany, the treatment was far harsher. The Soviets viewed the Hitler Youth as a symbol of fascist militarism that needed to be crushed entirely. Thousands were sent to labor camps. Those suspected of acting as informants or assisting the Gestapo were punished severely. Interrogations were brutal, and confessions, true or not, were often extracted by force. In both East and West, many children became refugees. Their cities were in ruins, their parents dead, missing, or imprisoned. Former Hitler Youth were suddenly responsible for their own survival, scavenging for food in rubble-filled streets. The ideology that once promised them eternal power now left them starving and afraid. And then there were those who had worn a different uniform, the girls of the League of German Girls, or the Bund Deutscher Mädel. They had not been trained primarily for combat, but for loyalty and motherhood. Many were now left in a world scarred by the mass rapes committed across Germany in the final weeks of the war. Their trauma was compounded by shame, silence, and the sudden realization that their faith in the Reich had not protected them at all. Some found themselves pregnant, raising children fathered by soldiers of an occupying army they had been taught to fear and hate. For years after the war, former Hitler Youth were looked at with suspicion. Classmates bullied them, neighbors whispered about them. No matter how young they had been, they were seen as part of the regime that had destroyed Europe. But the greatest struggle was internal. Many carried memories of battles they should never have fought. Some had killed soldiers, sometimes other Germans who refused to keep fighting. They remembered comrades blown apart beside them. They remembered chanting "Heil Hitler" with pride, and now felt crushing guilt. A generation of children had become old far too soon. Yet among them were those who would rebuild Germany. In the West, the new Federal Republic needed loyalty from its youth if it hoped to stand against the Soviet Union. Former Hitler Youth members were quietly absorbed into society. Some became teachers, police officers, business leaders, and politicians. Their past was rarely discussed. The focus was on moving forward. Many buried their memories so deeply that decades later, their own children would never know what uniforms they had once worn. In the East, the German Democratic Republic rebuilt under Marxist-Leninist ideology. Former Hitler Youth were required to prove their loyalty to the communist state. Many joined the Free German Youth, a new state-controlled organization that looked disturbingly similar to what had come before. Marching, uniforms, ideological drills. Only the ideology had changed. Total obedience remained. Meanwhile, Nazi war criminals attempted to recruit from the disillusioned youth around them. Some boys who still clung to the ideals of the past joined underground neo-Nazi cells, small, scattered, but dangerous enough that Allied intelligence took them seriously. They dreamed of a Fourth Reich. Most of these groups faded with time, but a few would survive, mutating into the neo-Nazi networks of later decades. A small number left Europe entirely. Former Hitler youth joined foreign militaries or emigrated to South America. There, aging Nazis still clung to their ideology and sought to pass it on. Some of these individuals would continue supporting extremist beliefs into the 21st century. But for most, the hardest battles were the ones fought in silence. Without proper mental health care, many suffered from what we now know as PTSD. Nightmares of combat haunted them. They replayed propaganda speeches in their minds. They questioned whether they had been victims or perpetrators. Therapy and acknowledgement came too late for many. The truth is that most Hitler youth didn't see themselves as evil during the war. They saw themselves as heroes. And that is what made the indoctrination so powerful and the aftermath so devastating. Germany wrestled with this for generations. During the 1950s and 60s, society avoided discussing the Hitler Youth experience. Shame and denial kept the subject buried. But as time passed, silence became impossible. When the children of former Hitler Youth asked, "What did you do in the war?" the answers were fragmented, evasive, or emotional. Some former members finally spoke out in memoirs and interviews. They described how the organization fed them a fantasy of greatness, how songs, uniforms, and camaraderie made it intoxicating. They admitted being manipulated into loyalty long before they were old enough to understand the consequences. One former member recalled that after the war, he could not understand why everyone suddenly hated the things he had been praised for only months earlier. Another remembered seeing documentary footage of concentration camps and breaking down completely, realizing that his proud salutes had supported mass murder. Confronting that truth became the ultimate test of character. While justice was focused on high-ranking figures and SS commanders, the Hitler Youth mostly avoided legal punishment. They were children manipulated by adults who often escaped justice themselves. But morally, the punishment was far heavier. They had to spend their entire lives rebuilding themselves from the inside. Some did so admirably. A number of former Hitler Youth would later become outspoken activists against extremism, dedicating their lives to ensuring children were never again exploited by such brutality. Yet others never changed. They remained unrepentant, clinging to the ideology that had justified their youth. Even into old age, some defended Hitler's vision, excusing the horrors as exaggerations or lies. For those individuals, the war never truly ended. Today, the youngest surviving members of the Hitler Youth are in their late 80s or 90s. Their movement is nearly gone, but its shadow remains. Germany has become one of the strongest advocates for democracy and remembrance, precisely because so many of its citizens once lived the opposite. Modern German education does not shy away from the truth. Students learn about the Holocaust in detail. Memorials stand where atrocities occurred. Silence, once a shield, has become a warning. The story of the Hitler Youth after the war is not one of simple forgiveness or simple blame. It is the story of what happens when a society realizes its children were turned into weapons and must then be taught how to be human again. Generations later, the question still lingers. Where does personal responsibility begin? How do we judge those who were manipulated before they could understand morality? There are no easy answers, but the most chilling lesson is this: children can be taught anything. And when a government controls what they believe, future battles are already lost long before the first shot is fired. The Hitler Youth did not vanish with the Third Reich. They grew up, they rebuilt, and they carried their past with them for the rest of their lives. Their story forces us to confront how fragile young minds truly are, and how easily idealism can be twisted into fanaticism. What do you think? Were the Hitler Youth victims, perpetrators, or something in between? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this video insightful, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.